you and I've kind of talked about this briefly. It's the survival signals, right? So the thing is, there are these 6 or 7, don't quote me on that, I can never remember because I forget to count every time, manipulation techniques in life. Okay, what Gavin in his book talks about is he talks about we all use these techniques, but it's our intent, right? So he talks about the predatory criminal that has very sinister intents, right? But as he's talking about this, he also mentions that we use it, and I agree with this, okay? And it's all about your intent, okay? So for dog trainers, you'll find, like, I use some of these strategies because it's for the best interest of the dog and the owner, right? Okay, so the very first one he talks about is forced teaming, okay? So forced teaming is an effective way to establish premature trust because it's a we're in the same boat kind of attitude, and it's hard to rebuff because you're feeling rude.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of us would be like, something like, oh, so we should really feed our dogs really good quality of food. That is a way we do that. Okay. What this does, this is interesting, it says the best cons make the victims want to participate. Right? And that's what you do as a salesperson. You want that person to think it's their idea.
Yeah.
Okay? Because that's just how we psychologically work. Okay? So when I talk to people, especially when I do my meet and greets and over the phone, I'm like, look, from here on forward, the quote is valid for 2 months. I'm not going to contact you again.
Yeah.
Because the ball's in your court.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. And if you're dealing with someone through your life who uses forced teaming, so for example, that'll be something like, maybe you come home or your mum comes home when you're younger and she's like, yeah, we should clean this up, and then you kind of end up with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's multiple ways of using this. I remember one of my friends said to me when his kids used to come to him and he said, Dad, we're so bored. He's like, all right, now see what we got to do. We got to paint this wall, and then the kids ends up helping him. But that benefited him and his children, because then they learn skills.
Yeah.
So see how you can use forced teaming to do
Positive
that.
way.
Yeah. So the problem here that I want to talk about is, one of the problems is people talk about the cost of being rude. Okay, so maybe not quite as relevant to dogs, but I will relate it to dogs. But he says here, safety is the preeminent concern of all creatures, and it clearly justifies a seemingly abrupt and rejecting response from time to time. This specifically to me relates to dog reactivity. Okay, so the problem is we look at it and we're like, this came out of nowhere, or we're like, that was such an inappropriate response. But what he says here, which I find very interesting, is he says that's because the appropriateness of our response is relative to the behavior that provoked it.
Okay.
So it's in the eye of the provoked. It's for them to decide whether it was appropriate or not. And what makes this very difficult is if you have a dog that hasn't learned the skills to read other dogs and assert their boundaries, and sometimes how a lot of people will talk about, the dog's growling, and they'll say, don't tell the dog off for growling because the next thing he's going to do is snap, right? Because that's communication. The problem is you're removing and you're not picking up on the subtle cues. If you're not picking on subtle cues, then a dog will use more explicit, abruptive cues to be like, this is what it is. And when we're dealing with reactivity, the deal becomes, if it's an inappropriate response from the dog because of context, because the dog doesn't understand context, your job as the handler is to step in. You have to match the dog's goal. So if the dog's goal is to be safe, you have to keep them safe, and that will reduce their reactivity. The problem is it's going to be a management thing, meaning you're going to do it forever, unless the dog is capable of learning those skills of identifying context and how to respond appropriately.
So you're saying, like, in a situation like with the dog growling, like, if it's the right context and the dog's being inappropriate, you want to shut it down at that point before it escalates.
Yeah, what you do if it's inappropriate appropriate
Yeah.
for the dog to growl,
Yeah.
right? It's like a burn. Or it's like you gotta remove that coping mechanism
Like a
first.
what, sorry?
Like a burn. Like you gotta scrub off the crap off
Yeah.
the burn first.
Yeah.
That's very painful.
Yeah.
Okay? You gotta stop that coping mechanism. But the
Yeah.
deal then is you support the dog.
So you keep the dog safe.
You keep the dog safe. So that is where you go back to say, you know what? Let's go back to the more subtle cues and I'll listen to those.
Yeah.
You're not going to say, to me it's unethical to say, well, no, the dog not only needs to, tolerate it forever, but they need to enjoy it. Like, to me, that's unethical.
Yeah.
So if you're saying to me, well, I don't understand, like me and my 3-year-old child just walked past this dog and he tried to eat her. And that's what I'm saying, what he was saying earlier about the, it's random, random one-off events, like with people. But the problem is for the dog, it accumulates. So this is where a child like that, like, oh, we walked past this dog and he just tried to eat her. And it's like, the dog probably has history with kids.
Yeah.
So the dog's now generalized. But you look at that context and you say, but this is inappropriate because it was unprovoked.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If that's the case, that means we need to think about what's the dog trying to communicate. So reactivity, is he trying to, offense is best defense? Or is he trying to play and he sounds really angry?
Yeah.
That dog needs to learn some impulse control. So forced teaming in that regard is literally what I do with clients. It's like you're forced to be in a team with your dog.
Yeah.
If you want that to stop.
Yeah.
Which means you should be if that's your word, like, yeah, I'll protect you. Your actions speak, and that's what your dog's listening to.
Yeah.
Not your words.
Yes, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And really, I'm just going to repeat what Gavin says here. He says, the appropriateness of our response is relative to the behavior being provoked. Meaning the response is in the eye of the provoked. So if I'm like, you just stepped on my foot 3 times and I go, oi, someone could go, why are you being so rude? It's like, actually, I've been withholding the first 2 times you stepped on my toe and now I'm telling you need to watch out. You do it again, I might slap you.
So is that where you're saying we need to match the dog?
You need to think about that, yes. You need to think about, okay, this is inappropriate, but there must be something that caused this. There must be history as well. So I'm going to shut down this behavior, right? But I'm going to teach you the more subtle cues.
Yeah.
That's like saying to someone, when you get angry, you can't punch people.
No.
Okay, so let's try and communicate. Here's the problem. If I try and communicate and it's not working, why would I use it? I go back to punching people because clearly that works.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been told, people say to me, oh, violence doesn't solve anything. Every single time that I've been bullied by people and I go through the process of, negotiation and talking and being like, hey, getting other people involved, the ones who have authority, it didn't work. Do you know what worked? Going like, come here, let me beat the crap out of you. Every time they stopped.
Yeah.
You tell me violence doesn't work, you're wrong. I'm sorry. Violence does work. The problem is, does it work in the long run? That's a different question, but we can talk about it at a different time. So anyway, he says here,
Good question.
yeah.
So when the people that are like, oh, you can't tell a dog off for growling,
Yeah.
where are they, like, and they're saying, oh, the dog will just be quicker to escalate and won't growl the next time.
It's not that the dog won't growl, it's that when there's a bit of context, there's like caveats around that, alright? So there's like a little rabbit hole with that.
Yeah.
It's like you shouldn't tell the dog off for growling when the dog's communicating something, right? However, it comes to, is this a compromising thing? So for example, if a dog's growling because it wants to sleep on my bed, is this appropriate because the dog has now decided that this is his resource and he feels threatened? No, it's my resource. So if you're growling, I will not let you on the bed in the first place, and therefore there's no conflict. So if the dog doesn't stop being like, oh, this is my resource, and I go, no, this is my resource, this is where that compromise comes in with, am I going to let my dog continue growling and, control this resource or not? Or am I going to limit their access to the resource, and then we don't have that conflict?
Yeah.
Right. So growling has it's a communication.
So it has its place.
It has its place. You cannot say you can't tell a dog off for growling, because that's very general.
Yeah.
But you also can't say you always tell a dog off for growling. That is too general. You need to look at the context a bit better. Like that.